Welcome to the Andrew Holland Podcast, where we explore the stories of successful people, get insight and advice from individuals who have accomplished amazing things, and dive deep into understanding ourselves as human beings. Now, here's your host, Andrew Holland.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Andrew Holland Podcast. We have a very special guest joining us today, Cody Schneider, the founder of Swell AI. Cody, thank you so much for joining us today.
Andrew, thank you for having me. Super excited to be here and chat with you.
So you've been in the startup scene for a long time, and in this 21st century, that seems to be the talk of the town, especially with AI now. And you are in the sexy industry of AI, shall we say. So I want to delve into that because to a lot of us who aren't necessarily techies, which you are, we've talked enough where I can officially give you that expert title. I'm as far as from being a techie as possible. So I want to delve into that and help us all better understand what is this AI? What's it going to do to different industries? Where have you found a niche, so to speak? But before we do that, like I said, you've been in the startup scene for a while, and it's a very interesting enigma to some of us who have not been in it. So tell us what that's like, but start by telling us, how did you get into it? Where are you from? Where were you born and raised? And what ultimately led you to the startup scene?
Yeah, great question. I think for everybody that's there, they don't really know how they ended up there. Majority of people, they start doing something like random online. So for me, it was like just flipping like sneakers. Um, like that evolved into, okay, I'm going to do print on demand, which is a type of like e-commerce where they basically, you have a distributor that holds all of these products for you and you basically are like a broker for them. So you create designs. This could be like t-shirts, keychains, anything that you can imagine that you could customize, and then sell them across platforms, whether that's like Amazon or eBay or Etsy or your Shopify store, etc. So from there, I ended up building a small software solution that was basically to help these types of sellers. It was for like product, it really for like customer, like data extraction, and then product analytics for like what are repeat customers buying, like how do we sell them more. Fast forward, somehow ended up working at a B2B marketing agency, where we specialized in like helping like kind of like manufacturing companies that were in that high Fortune 500 space. Think about like bathtub manufacturers, window manufacturers, like all this unsexy stuff, and helping them transition into digital. And so my role there was really kind of on the digital strategy side and assisting them on that piece, and like kind of cut my teeth in that world and learned like basically my boss at the time was like deep within that world, but had spent time in Silicon Valley. He went to Y Combinator, and did his whole base. We always joke that like everybody goes out to the Bay Area to go to Mecca. They learn everything they can, and then they go and they use it in some other industry. And that was that exact story. So yeah, was working with that and kind of learned all these principles. And then from there, ended up in the B2B SaaS landscape. I worked for this company called Rupa Health, and that was kind of my first like venture-backed company that I ended up working with. That company, we took it from a $20 million valuation to a $110 million valuation in about 6 months. So, crazy rapid growth. This was in I think it was 2021 was when I joined. I was like employee 6 there. And so, yeah, I think for a lot of people, it's like this black box, but in reality, nobody really knows how they got there. Like I, dropped out of college twice, ended up getting an economics degree later. Everybody I knew was kind of this like self-taught, the best engineers, software engineers I know that work at all these companies are just people that basically watched YouTube videos when they were 12 on how do I, build games or something like this. But I think the common thread between all of them is there's like a lot of agency. Like people just like have like this desire to do things. Like there's almost this disgust for meetings, if that makes sense. Unless it's to say, hey, I saw this, I did this, this is what we learned, this is what we're doing next. It's almost like a recap. But anyways, yeah, just a high level.
That almost seems like a prerequisite to be in the startup scene is you have to have gone to college, dropped out maybe once or twice,
It's ridiculous.
and you go on to, Zuckerberg, you name any of them. So a lot to unpack there, Cody. Where were you born and raised?
Yeah. So I'm from Idaho originally. So this town called Coeur d'Alene, it's up in the north. It's about 2 hours from the Canadian border. So,
and you grew up most of your childhood there?
Yeah, spent time there and then also in Colorado. But yeah,
Okay.
that was kind of the two locations that I spent the most time in. So.
Okay, and at what age did you start getting into print sneakers?
Yeah, yeah. So I got into the kind of apparel space when I was around like 15 or 16. Learned how to do screen printing and then started flipping bootleg band t-shirts like at high school. And then that led into honestly, it just sold some stuff to like clubs. And naturally, I always just kind of love that process of the sell, like finding something that people want to buy and then selling it. That was just like really interesting to me. And what's funny too is like when you look at all,
Why apparel? Like what
I think it's just the most accessible for like most people. They're like, oh, this is this like thing that's simple, and I can go to Michael's and buy blank T-shirts and for $5, and
Okay.
then here's the screen printing thing. I learned some graphic design, and then basically put this on it, and now I can sell it for 25, right? And like my margin on that's huge. And so it's just like this very simple business for people to kind of like initiate their learning of how do I run a company. And again, this is like a super small scale version of this, but yeah, I think
Low barriers to entry.
totally exactly. But there's also like just like a lot of like skills that are a part of that where it's like, okay, how do I convince people to buy? Like, how do I make consistent product? Like, what's customer service like how do I do sales? Like all these things. And I think for most people that end up in this world, it's like some version of that. Like you talk to people that like ran Minecraft servers, or like they were like, doing sneaker flipping. And like I had a friend that would go to Nordstrom's rack. You can't do this anymore, but they had an unlimited return policy. And so he would basically look for things on sale and like buy them, put them on eBay, and then if they didn't sell, he would return them after 30 days and he would just cycle through inventory. And so basically it was just like this, he had unlimited inventory. And so if it didn't sell, it was like no problem.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I think for everybody, it's kind of like always this game. Like it's like they love puzzles, and then they figure out this like real world puzzle that makes money. And then they just like get sucked into this space because it's just kind of this natural thing that grabs everybody.
Is that what the startup scene really is about? Just a big game?
Yeah, I think so. I think in the early stage for sure. Like it's like the people that thrive there and kind of prosper there they're just like puzzle people. Is kind of what I always go back to. Like they love like figuring things out. And as soon as it's figured out and they've built a process around it and it's like now it's in an operations mode, they get really disinterested. They only want to
Yeah.
work on those things. That's why these people are actually terrible at big companies. They're the worst employees you could ever have because they are not good operators most of the time. They are really focused on like, okay, how do I take all of this, disparate information that's looks unrelated and then synthesize that together to create these like new things. And once they've done that, that's where they get kind of their, dopamine hit. And once that process is defined and they've kind of coordinated that whole thing, they want to move on to like, what is that next thing? So the again, that operation side is what they kind of despise is what I found. So
Well, yeah, I mean, and you think about the imagination and the creativity that is required for some of these startups that we see. Once you get to the mundane of growing and operating a multi-million, multi-billion-dollar business, they check out because that's not their strength. Their strength is on the startup side and the creativity. So it makes a lot of sense. What's interesting to me is some founders know that, and other founders try to hold on too long and they don't realize, yeah, we need to bring someone in a little bit more professional who has this business operational experience. And the ones that are wildly successful, I would say, figure that out early once they've got the company to a certain point. I want to go back to your history and talk about this print sneakers. And then you said you shifted into something more software based.
yeah, so did a small product. It was just like a Chrome extension. But again, like there was related to what I was doing in that kind of like print on demand space. So solving the classic like scratching my own itch. But then that led into this like working at this B2B agency. So that was kind of like the whole, I guess, trajectory of that experience.
How did you get to the, and B2B, by the way, for our listeners who don't know, it's business to business. So it's a one business selling to another business versus B2C, which is business to consumer. How did you get to the B to B. And the reason I'm asking some of these questions, people wonder, how did you get to where you are, Cody? I see all of these things and I want to know, what path should I be taking? And it sounds like a lot of random things happen.
Totally.
But it's certainly putting yourself in the space, being out there. There's no question to me that you're genetically an entrepreneur. You are surrounded by people who are ambitious just internally, and you follow your passions, and then that leads from one thing to the next. So how did you move from this Google Chrome extension, where it sounds like you were basically offering, instead of you printing the t-shirts yourself, you were offering a way for people who wanted to do that to utilize the extension that you had created and do that for themselves. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. It was basically a tool that helped them sell more of these print-on-demand products, right? So
And how did that lead to an opportunity with the B2B company? What was the name of the B2B company that you worked with?
yeah, so it's called Reynolds and Myers. It's a marketing agency. I think they're based out of the Boise area now. But so his name's Jeff Reynolds. He's kind of been in this world for forever, and again went to YC. He co-founded a company called WeForce. But long story short, I I got introduced to him and was doing all of this kind of weird stuff on Pinterest at the time. And they had a client that they were trying that was in the home and bath space. And so he was like, "Hey, like, would you be interested in working on this?" And I honestly, at the time, had zero desire to like B2B is just was uninteresting, to be totally transparent. But long story short, he's like, "Hey, here's this test budget. Just go spend it. Tell me what the data says." And the test budget was massive. And I was like, "This is a test budget. Okay, well, what does a real budget look like?" And so, yeah, we ended up like creating, I think it was some right around like 7,000 leads. It was basically like an ebook download on how to like redesign your bathroom. And then we sold, you upsell products to these contractors that would, then be repeat like customer purchases for this like bathtub shower based
Mhm.
manufacturer. But yeah, so that was how I got kind of sucked into B2B. It was, and really, I find that this is for a lot of people how it ends up. It's like they build some type of consumer thing or like B to SMB thing that's way more on the consumer focus side. And then they slowly just get dragged down the funnel to where the money is. Like if they just keep optimizing for like, how do I get paid more?
Yeah.
But yeah, I think for people that are listening, the thing I would say is just find smarter people than you and try to get them to pay you to learn from them. And that was the best advice I ever got from somebody. And just to restate that, it's like, you're basically getting an education. Like you are getting paid to get an education from somebody that's like done this more than you. Right. And, to talk about this in comparison to like, the traditional education system, like I remember sitting in classes and being like, I know more about digital marketing than this professor that I'm paying like thousands of dollars a semester to. Right. Um, Made zero sense. And in contrast, it's like, okay, here's this person that's like actually on the front lines. Like these are what the textbooks are written about. And with all of this stuff, like with the pace that it's moving at, there's really no other way to actually know what's going on. It's like you're either like on that forefront or you're not, right? And we're seeing that right now with like AI model training in particular. And we could go down this rabbit hole later. But long story short is that the people that actually know how to train AI models are like these like 19-year-old kids that found YouTube videos when they were 14 that were basically like, here's how to build neural nets, and here's they were doing like, again, dumb stuff like that looks like toys. It was like games. But now suddenly these skill sets are incredibly valuable when it comes to, okay, I'm trying to build a large language model that can run on an iPhone. How do I do that? Right. So yeah, that's just kind of a tangent, but
It's just, yeah, it's stunning how the paradigm has shifted. And don't even get me started on academia versus real world experience. My tolerance level for academia has basically dropped to below zero at this point. And to hear you say, I know more than what this professor is talking about, who's probably been in the classroom for 30 years and doesn't have a clue. It's different if you're in finance or accounting or something like
totally.
that. Okay. But in the context of which we're speaking, you're going to sit there in a classroom from someone who hasn't been in the real world in the digital marketing or the AI space or any technology or coding space, and they're gonna. I mean, you've got to be in the real world to keep up. It just moves so quickly.
Totally. I think it's just the pace is what's scary to people, especially on the AI frontier. Like there's not a it's just hard to keep up on what's happening. I mean, and what's hilarious is that it's like all happening on Twitter and YouTube and in like these like private Discord channels now, which is again this like non-traditional way. But people will be like, "Hey, here's this demo of me like scheduling, 1,000 meetings on people's Calendlies, and then an AI is going to take all of those calls. Let's see what happens, right? Like I have this friend, his name's Michael Beer, and this is like something that he did like about 2 months ago. Is he basically like wrote this script that found Calendly scheduling URLs, scheduled like those Calendly calls, and then like they basically made this like AI voice to chatbot that would like ingest the person's conversation, like turn it into a transcript, and then write a response, and then turn that into audio. And the lag time on it was like a little bit, right? Like it's like probably 0.5 seconds ish. So like you could tell like there was like a little bit of thought going on. But like again, we're in the early days of this. Like imagine when that happens, and when it goes and it robocalls your grandmother saying that it's the IRS or whatever, right? Like there's the kind of all these.
Doesn't this scare you? I mean, some of this, that's freaky.
Yeah, it's crazy. I think there's aspects of it that are very scary. I think that with all of this stuff, like the thing that doesn't scare me is like people are really worried about this like sentience occurring. And I could be totally wrong on this. Like there's way more educated people than me, but basically from my understanding and like what we know and what we see, again, just from the technological standpoint, is like the requirement of like basically the power and the GPU, like basically the processing power we need to like mimic a human brain, as an example, like does not exist on the face of this planet right now. Like there's not enough like power to even mimic a human brain. So they're basically, the projections are like 10 years off for like us to even have enough power globally to mimic this. I think it's going to be way longer for that, like probably like 20 to 30 years. It probably will happen because all they're realizing is that, oh, if I just like basically creating these neuron structures that look like the neuron structures that exist within like nature. So for example, like if I like there's this great study that came out of MIT that was like, we're going to take 185 neurons and we're going to structure them so it looks like an earthworm, and then we're going to like put these neurons, these artificial neurons, into an object like a mechanical object that like functions and moves like an earthworm, like it has the ability to do that. Like how will it just start to naturally act? And what they found is that it just started to naturally act like an earthworm without any programming, right? It was just the neurons firing and being in this like closed body. You can just like, if you go Google this, like just like like neurons earthworm MIT, it'll probably come up. There's a whole YouTube video talking through it. But that, like, I think so you scale that up, that idea. Like if you go to like insects and then these like more complex like animals, like you're talking about these neuron structures that are really complex that we're basically having to mimic to create these these capabilities. So like at the scale that we're at right now, it's just like we're kind of just doing magic tricks, but it will evolve, but I think it's just going to be at a slower pace than people realize from it actually functioning how they think it's actually functioning.
Well, and you used a really important word that I think people are missing in the entire midst of this, what I will call AI hyper focus, or, pandemic. Maybe bad choice of words given the time, but everybody's talking about AI. Sentient. I don't even care if those neurons act like an earthworm does, simply because the neurons are firing as such and they've been structured as such. This idea of a sentient being, we will not create. We can try to play God, but there is no way that this will happen, that this AI will turn into true sentient beings. It defies all of creation, quite frankly. What is your stance on that?
Yeah, I think it's going to look and feel similar to how we have relationships with people, but not be it. Yeah, I've had a change of heart on this, honestly, though. Like recently, I watched that movie, The Creator, and it's like, if this thing is having a human experience and like it's in a human body ish looking thing, and like you have emotions and relationships and it has emotions and relationships, like is that so different from like the human experience? So I don't know. I don't know honestly how I like truly feel about it anymore. It's definitely an evolving thing, but I think in its current form, it's like, this is just a tool. It's like Microsoft Excel, right? Like this is something 50 years off in the future, if not further.
Well, yeah, and there's no doubt they're going to be able to do a robot that makes you think that it has emotions and that it has the sentient nature of a human being. But to me, this concept that we're ever going to recreate rational thinking. I understand code and programmatic languages can make it appear that they can process a trillion things at 1 second to come up with an answer. But this idea of rational thinking or sentient feelings that are true and genuine, I just don't buy it. And so it's interesting to hear you say that it sounds like you've kind of been on both sides of that.
Yeah, I mean, initially I was like, so I'm a huge fan of Asimov, the science fiction
Oh,
writer. I mean, this is the topic that he
yep.
covers a lot regularly. Like his series that talks about like Daniel like Ogilvy is basically this
Yep.
idea, right? It's a robot that has these this existence. The thing that I am struggling with more and more is like, so say I mimic like a human brain and I put it in a human body,
Like a real
and
human body.
like, yeah, or not even biological,
Okay.
right? Like it's robotic. But if the neuron structures are the same, and like we have the assumption that this thing like is basically like functioning like our brain does, I think it messes with people's mind of like, am I real or not? Is more the problem
Yeah.
here, because if like we can basically clone like a neuron structure of a brain, and then it is just naturally starts acting like a human being, like what does that mean to us? Like, are we just like this like programmed biologic computer animal? And like the answer is probably yes, and that's a really scary thing, I think, for both me and everybody else. But again, I don't, we can go down this rabbit hole of like,
Well, we could, and it's fun to talk
for
about
sure.
just because everybody's having this conversation. It's fun to have it kind of in this live form between someone who knows nothing about technology, but certainly has thoughts about this and reads enough in the world, versus someone like you who is actually in the scene, and to hear kind of how you view it. But obviously, I think we've touched to go down this path. You're touching into divinity and souls and a whole bunch of things that, as you said, we could go down that rabbit hole. So I want to jump back onto Rupa Health. You talked about, so you were at this B2B company, and then you eventually moved to Rupa Health. How did you take it from, give us what specifically did Rupa Health do, and how did you take it from the valuation, the exponential valuation that you described to us earlier?
Yeah. So again, just to reiterate, what we ended up doing was taking it from like a $20 million valuation to a $110 million valuation in about 6 months. So my friend was working at the company, and that's who recruited me. He was basically like, "Hey," and we'd done some projects in the past together. I'd known him for like probably 6 or 7 years at this point. I was doing consulting at the time. I had left that previous B2B agency and was working with just kind of a whole broad spectrum of like, from like creators that were selling like info product courses to we were working with some like CrossFit gym owners, and like also like some like home manufacturer, just like random stuff that was coming up. But he reached out, was like, "Hey, I'm at this company. It's growing like insanely fast just by word of mouth." And for venture back, like insanely fast word of mouth is like 3% per month compounding, right? So nothing crazy. Like when you like think about, oh, it's like only 3%, $100 to 103, that doesn't mean anything, right? But like when you,
Month to month compounding from the traditional world, it is crazy.
it's crazy, yeah. Yeah, it's crazy. Yeah. So we were like, okay, like he's like, I layered on ads and this is what happened. And the graph just is like this vertical, thing. He's like, do you want to come help me do this? He's like, a lot of my time is being sucked up on like, negotiating partnership relationships for co-marketing. Like, can you just come run our marketing, like ops basically? So initially, again, I was like, no, I don't want to do this. Saw the data and I was like, oh my God, this is super interesting. So yeah, so what the company is it's basically a marketplace for lab tests, or especially lab tests ordering. So it aggregates like all of the specialty lab test manufacturers and like lab companies in the U.S. and then puts them into a single portal for people to basically order lab tests through. A lot of our clients were people that were doing like chronic disease management, so it'd be like gut health or something like SIBO or IBS, any of these types of things. So yeah, the how we ended up growing this was kind of a combination of things. So we basically, the first thing I did was when I scraped every target customer's like email address, and phone number, and like name that I could find on the internet. So we did this initially on Google Maps, and then we went to forums and anywhere else that I could find. They were medical practitioners was our target customer. So the tactical components of this, we can get into any of the tactics if you want like deeper, but the high level is basically you find the URLs of these companies, and then you use software like Hunter.io to go find emails that are associated with those websites. Once you've found those emails, you then validate them with software like an email validation software. A great example is called Zero Bounce. And then at that point, you have this like huge target list of customers that you then can go like do all this different marketing to. So we ended up scraping, again, like everybody we could find in the US, put them into a cold email campaign. That same audience, we uploaded that like email like list to Facebook, Google.
How many emails did you generate?
I mean, I can't even, probably around in the 250,000 range, like 250,000 initially.
Wow.
And so, yeah, we basically were like, okay, we're going to hit this whole list over the next 6 months on the cold email side. We're also going to do marketing to them across all channels. And then that same list, what we ended up doing is then building out media for those companies, for Rupa, that was basically distributed to those companies. So we saw that like they were really interested in podcasts and live classes. And so we built basically like we'd have a weekly podcast, a weekly live class where we'd have some type of educator come on and talk about whatever it is that they're doing, some industry expert. And then we would take that media and we would distribute it to that same audience as well. And then the long form content, we would then take and we chop that up into all these bite-sized pieces that we could distribute across all the respective channels that this audience was on. So for example, I take the podcast and I make clips for YouTube Shorts, TikTok, Instagram Reels. I make, like little quotes, like posts for Instagram, for Facebook, for any of these static images, and then also take those podcasts, turn those into blog posts, turn those into shorter YouTube videos, like with whatever the key takeaways were. So, and this is really honestly the inception of Swell AI.
I was going to say, it sounds like this is where Swell AI came up from.
Yeah, exactly. So like we, by the end of it, we had a team of 15 plus people that were all doing like media production for this audience. And this is the best way in my experience to build brand when nobody knows who you are and you're in this B2B landscape that's super high trust and like hard to get in front of these people. So like physicians, as an example, are like anybody that has a higher dollar amount of like that they're like if they have a higher purchasing power, they like make more money or they're more economically stable. They are typically harder to market to because they're getting marketed to so often because they have buying power. And so you have to be really creative in the ways that you're trying to get in front of them and basically capture their attention. And so again, like this is how podcasts are these like incredible tools for companies right now. Is like nobody feels that they're marketing yet. It will one day feel like it's marketing, but there's still like this like idea that this is almost education or like, it's like, it's people are very receptive to it. And why I say this is like, we were taking the podcast and that list of people that we scraped, I was just like cold emailing them podcast episodes and getting like 40% open rates, 5% click through rates. Right.
So
then we were like, okay, let's, instead of cold email them, let's just start to slowly sequence them into a newsletter. So we'd add like 200 people a day to an automation so that like we could grow a list by like 5,000 a month. And we did that for the first 6 months. And then we started ratcheting up the amount of like volume that we were like putting into that list on a daily basis. So the last time I talked to him, my friend, he was still there and who recruited me. They had a list that was in the like 750,000 range. I mean, it's like a massive email list. It's basically like, almost every practitioner in the US. And then on a weekly basis, they're getting emails about like, here's this podcast and here's this live class and like all these things. Right. But the kicker here and so our thesis was like, okay, I think we can make a media company at this company or at Rupa that will grow Rupa, but we think we could make it big enough where we can actually have it subsidize the costs of the growth and the marketing of the company. So instead of your marketing like department being a cost center, suddenly it turns into a profit center for the organization. So anyways, we got the podcast big enough. In about 6 months, we took it from like non-existent to a top 10 medical podcast in the US. And then we started approaching advertisers. They ended up going with Athletic Greens. Athletic Greens sponsored the podcast. That basically paid all the salaries of the entire growth team. And suddenly you had this like, it was this asset that was getting like Athletics Greens was paying for the production and basically the growth of the company a lot. And so, this is the kind of opportunity that exists right now. And as you can see,
It's
I'm pretty animated about it because it's the
well,
craziest thing I've ever seen. So
I mean, I got to ask you 10 trillion questions, but we're not going to do it all on the podcast. But so what was the actual, and was that podcast called Rupa Health, or what's the name of the 10?
no, yeah. So we called it the Root Cause Medicine
Okay.
podcast. So we named the podcast like around a keyword that we saw was growing so that we could ride that wave. So root cause medicine was this growing search term. We saw more people basically trying to like describe it's a lot of chronic disease management. So like how people think about it is like, well, what's actually going wrong and how do I change it? So called it that. And then it kind of evolved now. It's like people would probably refer to it as like the Rupa
Okay.
Health podcast or the Rupa podcast, something like this. But yeah, that was the initial was like, let's just latch on to this like growing wave that's naturally happening and then just talk about that topic.
What was the actual revenue model for Rupa Health? How did they get dollars and cents?
Yeah, so they're a marketplace. So they took basically a fee on the transaction of the lab test ordering.
Okay.
So these practitioners, right? They have patients. They order all these labs for these patients, and so Rupa would take a rake off the top of that. And then basically the like how we could get people to pay that was the software was like basically 10x what everything else was in the in the industry, and then also there was like this layered on customer service for the patient, patient management process. So as you're like if you're a practitioner and you're ordering labs, like you're ordering the same labs for every patient, and they're supposed to like collect a sample that they then have to send back into the lab. Like the last thing you as a practitioner want to do is talk to 100 patients in a month about here's how you collect this lab, et cetera. And so Rupa basically was that man, like it was almost like an outsourced customer service mechanism for these practitioners so they could focus on the things that only they could do, which is creating like patient outcomes.
So they were willing to use it and pay for it because it basically took advantage of their competitive strengths and outsourced all the other. And did you
Exactly.
outsource that through videos and said, okay, customer XYZ, this is how you do this.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
it was like videos. They even got to the point where it was like text messages that were like texting, like it would go from like the patient's phone through like into like a portal that then like the customer experience team would basically like assist through. But the big thing there is that again why would I pay 7%? And this is like a great kind of learning for every company is like if your company helps another company grow, they will never leave you and they will always pay you, right?
Yeah.
And so like what we saw is that these practitioners that ended up using us, what was the natural effect of this is like they got more efficient, which allowed them to see more patients, which allowed their clinic to grow, which allowed them to hire more practitioners. And so it was just like this virtuous cycle where then Rupa would grow as they grow because it's this kind of foundational technology that's being implemented within the clinic. So
talk to us about the transition from what you just described, which is essentially, as we said, the basis of Swell AI, to you starting Swell AI with your co-founder, Max. Is that right?
yeah, my co-founder's name is Max. Yeah, Max Chahab. Yeah. So what ended up occurring is, so I left I left Rupa, went and worked at this other company for about 3 months. I was kind of on the tipping point of like, do I want to go do my own thing or not? And so ended up not working out with that company. It was just, I wasn't the right fit. I was for them. And what went back to doing was just consulting for early stage startups. And so with this company I was working with, they were building a CRM for insurance agents. And so it was basically like insurance agents sit on the top of this and they could run their whole business out of it.
Mm-hmm.
So with them, like again, same playbook. We were like, how do you take a company? You're like, how do you make a brand that's non-existent existent in a year? Podcasting is this super effective and easy way to do that. So we did the exact same thing, went and found all of these like emails of like all of their target audience, built out this whole like media engine for them, cold email, ads, etc. And then did this podcast on a weekly basis where it was basically like, here's how to grow your insurance business. And what business owner doesn't want to grow their business, right?
Exactly.
So through that process, it's just me, and then I had some like VAs that were helping me on the back end to kind of do this production. I realized and this was in March of 2022. So fast forward, it was in the summer, and everybody I'd known in this world was like messing with AI in some way, but they like it just wasn't good enough yet. But then July of 2022 hit, and it's just like something clicked with it. Like I think that's honestly when like GPT 3.5 Turbo like started to get released.
Mm.
It was just finally good enough where like as a marketer, I was like, oh, I can actually work with this. Like this is like just at that level where it's past that tipping point. And so I basically the first thing I did was I did like a bunch of programmatic SEO, and we could talk about this, but like we took like had some websites and we're like, let's just publish 20,000 AI written articles around target keywords and see what happens. And so like we like just as an example, like we just did this. My brother's in the medical space, and we just did this for a company that he owns. But we took their their monthly or their daily organic traffic from like 35 clicks a day to like 840 clicks a day in about like 6 months. 5 to 6 months. So we started that in August. So whatever that is now, it's
Just by
probably more close to that.
publishing artificial intelligence driven
Got it. You got
articles.
it. So and again, this is another rabbit hole we can probably go down, but like Google is like, I don't know, like, I don't know how they're going to combat this. They have basically said they don't care how content is generated as long as it's helpful. But to circle back around to kind of the origin of the media side. So with Swell, we are all playing with AI, and then I was on a road trip with my girlfriend, and we ended up staying at my co-founder's, now co-founder's Max's house. We had worked together at Rupa previously. And so we were honestly hot tubbing, and I was like, hey, I'm trying to solve this issue. Like, do you think it's possible with AI? And he was doing some stuff with embeddings. And he's like, yeah, I think that actually is. And so like, naturally, because this is how all of us are, he spun up a V1 of the product that night, like about 4 hours later. The next Monday, I reached out to a bunch of friends that I knew were doing stuff like doing podcasts or like media production for their companies. Was like, hey, would you be interested in like piloting this? So the first version of the product was like a Google Drive folder. We had friends upload MP3s to, and then we'd like download it, run it locally, and I'd email them back all of the content that the AI basically created. It was just written content to begin with. And that's how we got our first 10 customers. And then in October of 2023, we basically started, like, we built the web application and kind of went live. ChatGPT hit that year, the end of that year in December. And everything just kind of went bananas immediately after that. So January, we were positioned really well to kind of ride that wave, and just
January of 2024.
January of 2023. So
okay, so October of 2022. Okay,
yep,
and then
exactly,
January of 2023.
Exactly, yeah. And now it's like writing. I think we've written like a couple billion words, if I remember correctly, and just like transcribed just hundreds of thousands of hours of audio for these companies. And so yeah, it's pretty wild. But again, started out with just written content, and now we're moving into multimedia. Like, I'm pretty obsessed with this idea of like, can a company market itself? And this is this exciting thing that I think everybody is like trying to realize, or starting to realize, is like, oh, with all these tools, like, and all these APIs that exist, like hypothetically, like I could take, say it's even this podcast, or this, like the company that is this podcast, I could like plug it into this thing, and it just like, okay, I give it raw media, so like videos, and then it makes clips, and it schedules them, and then it publishes them, and then it like looks at the data to see what works, and then it goes back to its library or content library, and it finds more like that, and it creates this like flywheel, right? And you could do that.
And AI is doing all of that without humans.
Yeah, this is where this is headed, right? So like right now, there's like humans intermixed in all of these processes, but like this is how we see content marketing basically evolving, like really rapidly.
This is
so
moving
towards that.
Mind-boggling, Cody.
Yeah,
it's going to make us. It's going to make us as humans, podcasting is, everybody's got a podcast or starting to get a podcast. And now you're going to amp up the growth 1,000 times with AI. Is anything going to be real anymore?
I think that people are going to latch on to that realness more and more. And like, we're already seeing this, right? Where there's almost this pushback against AI generated media that doesn't feel human. So for example, this is a larger YouTube trend right now, and everybody's kind of talking about it, but like raw, authentic content is doing better on YouTube than overly edited, like AI generated content that's using AI voices. This is for long form content. Short form, it's a totally different game. Like, I know some people that run like faceless YouTube channels, is what they're called. and it's like literally entirely AI generated. And, it's like, here's 10 weird Victorian facts, and then it just says some like crazy stuff like about
I've
like
seen
what
a
the
ton of them.
Victorians. Yeah, totally. And so like, yeah. So, but for long form content, like podcasts, honestly, like vlogs are back as well, where it's like just like people talking through stuff. But
Someone told me that the other day. I'm like, blogs? I haven't heard that for like 20 years. Blogs are here again?
totally, 100%. It's like this, I don't know, it's just this pushback away from, and really, it's, like we see these cycles happen like every couple of years where it's like, okay, kind of this artificial, like influencer curated version of reality, like peaks. And then people are like, I don't want that. I want like more authentic. And then people start to make this like fake authentic. So there's like this, like, we're on that downslope now where it's like probably real authenticity is winning. And then people are going to start to do this where it's like fake authentic and they make these things happen. And then we'll go back to curated. And I mean, we've gone through probably like 3 or 4 of these cycles since the beginning of all of this like social content. But we're in that moment right now where I think people are latching on to how do I find those real things and how do like that's what they're consuming most of, because there is so much. It's like the lines are so blurred anymore. So
What on that point, AI is going to get so good that we won't know what's real and what's not. Do you believe that to be the case?
100%, 100%. This is like where I'm like, I tell people like I like don't have social on my phone. Like it's like a very important thing to me. And so like I think we're probably 18 to 24 months away from like, imagine like an infinite TikTok, right? Where it just like makes you content based off of what you consumed most. And it just like perfectly perfects the content type, and it like knows exactly what's going to keep you on platform longest. And so like every next video is better than the last one. So TikTok is kind of doing this already, but it's user generated content. So imagine that when it's not user generated and it's just the company that's basically like spoon feeding you this dopamine hit every time. And so I think that's just this inevitability. And like we're going to see this, it's going to be so whack.
What does our world look like, Cody, when that happens?
Yeah, I think that there's going to be like, and we're already seeing this, like a lot of like there's pushback now, like towards social or like move back to communities. Like forums are having a comeback, which is super random. Like, and I'm talking like like old school forums, right? That are just like text based, no images. There's some simple upvote system. Yeah. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that I think that like you're going to have this subset of people that are again like just totally almost offline and analog again, or like doing these more traditional like old school internet things, and then this whole other subset. But I'm really worried about this kind of next generation, as every person that is from like a previous generation is.
Well, you read my. I was going to ask, how old are you?
Yeah, I'm 29, so I turned 30 this year. So
okay, so I'm 37, so I've got a few years on you. But I look at even my generation and these generations below, my nieces and nephews. Like, no wonder why the suicide rate is
it's crazy.
Proportionally epic compared to previous generations. Nothing in their life is real.
Totally. I think that's an aspect. And then also it's like you have this, like, it's literally a number that shows your social status within your community. So I was talking to my younger cousin and she's like, yeah, like the hot girls have higher Instagram, like the highest Instagram followings. And so like previously, like when you're thinking about like social constructs, like it's like, oh yeah, there's kind of this like pecking order that exists, but there's no like, you're kind of guesstimating where you fit within that, which is like probably more healthy. But now when you have like a social media setting and you have a closed environment, so say there's like 1,000 students at the school, like if this individual has like the highest following, like you can kind of almost rank stack like who is the most popular and what is that pecking order, like both male and female.
It was localized though.
Yeah, just localized. And so I think that like, again, we're not as humans like programmed to to be okay with that. And so that's again this thing where I think it's like, but it's going to be a conscious choice. Like we're seeing this more and more, even in the younger generations. Like there's a great op-ed, I think it was in the New Yorker, or even it might have been even the New York Post, but they're basically like there's this whole like it's these high school students that are like, they're like Luddites, like by choice. They're like, yeah, I just want like a flip phone that like I can send like meet me here text messages and like phone calls, but like are intentionally choosing to not be a part of social because they're seeing what's happening to their communities. So again, we'll see where this goes, but I think there is kind of this pushback that's naturally happening because people are like, like, I mean, every person I talk to is like, I mean, and you probably, it's the same thing. Like even across generations, like I'm addicted to my phone. Like when I don't have it, I like feel this like almost like, it's like a come down, right?
It's terrible.
Yeah. And so I think that is like becoming a part of the zeitgeist, and there will be this like kind of like natural kickback, or it's going to be like, I only have an hour of time of consumption where I just zone out. But
The
yeah, I
problem
don't
is
know.
AI is not going away. I mean,
No,
AI,
for sure.
so
For
so you
sure.
might have a group of Luddites, but in business, everything we've just discussed, you're basically screwed. Like you're at you're either going to stand in front of the train and get completely run over, or you're going to jump on the train and try to navigate this crazy AI driven world.
Yeah. I'm probably more of an optimist, just like base default with all this stuff. But like, I view this right now, like if you're listening to this and you're like, oh my God, like AI is going to take my job, like I challenge you to like flip that switch or flip that script and be like, if I'm good at my job, like I'm a 10x person, and I suddenly like start to use these AI tools to be even better at my job, like I suddenly turn into a 100x person, and like I have so much leverage now within the organization that I'm working at. And like we're seeing this, right? So I think that's one component. The other side is that like there's probably jobs that will be lost, but there's also these new jobs that we're already starting to see created that are insane. So there's this one that's it's called an automation engineer. And so my friend is like he's a I think he's a head of automation at this company, and he's like head of automation engineering at this company. His whole job is he like airdrops into other teams at the company, and he analyzes and audits like what's going on within that team. And then he's like, cool, like what parts can I automate? Like using like basically these off the shelves tools like Zapier, Airtable, and like the Chat GPT API. And so he then automates those like the parts he can, and then he moves on to the next team, right? So like we're going to see these new roles start to develop based off of like these changes that are happening.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that and again, I live in this bubble, right? So like I go home, I talk to my uncle, and he like, is a contractor and like, owns his own business. Like he's not thinking about this whatsoever. And like, I also don't think it's going to affect him, right? Like, again, I live in this tiny little bubble where all we think about is this thing and talk about is this thing. So in reality, like majority of people haven't even like used Chat GPT and aren't even thinking about it. Like it's not even a part of their daily life yet. I don't even think they're going to realize it's a part of their daily life too, because these big companies are going to ship it to them and it's just going to show up on their iPhone one day, right? So
Well, that's almost even scarier. But I just had this conversation with a great friend and a previous guest on my podcast, Louis Buzz Giz, and we were talking about this exact thing because I've got a construction company with my brother, and he does some home building. He traditionally grew up in the pool space and very, very successful there. And we talked about blue collar versus white collar. Okay, what AI is going to do in the white collar side of things is it will displace jobs. There's zero question about it. Lawyers, accountants. I mean, it's going to change it for sure, if not entirely displace them. You want to talk about financial advisors? You want to talk about Wall Street? I mean, you've already probably seen this. Yeah. I was gonna say you're an accountant, and I'm a CPA, and I did a podcast. This was probably a year ago on when AI was really just kind of coming out, but now it's everywhere. I said, okay, if you're in white collar, you better be thinking about this
100%.
real. But if you're in blue collar, if you're a home builder, if you're doing remodeling, there's no AI that's going to like. I'm on job sites frequently,
Yep.
and I think about first off the hand and the eyes and some of the things you have to do just to build a house or build a deck or whatever you're building in the construction industry. You talk about your uncle; he's a contractor. What does he do?
Yeah, same thing. Like does custom builds, or they do a
Okay.
lot of like decks or add-ons or like that type of thing. So
But what AI will do is it will revolutionize the construction industry in some way. I mean,
for sure.
whether people realize it, ordering, material ordering,
Totally.
estimation.
Totally. I think again, it's going to be the the white collar roles at these companies will be like you're going to have these owners that it's like they have maybe a team of 10 people that are augmented by AI that are functioning like a 200 person team. And like, what does that
Yeah.
mean? But I do think the other thing that we're starting to see is like this augmented reality piece of like, okay, say you're on a job site and I'm wearing like, they look dumb as as all get out right now, like these like HoloLens or any of these
Mm,
augmented reality headsets, like even the one that Apple released. But like those
hmm
will get better, and like they're gonna get smaller and more like specific and like just better resolution. And so like imagine you're on a job site and it's like, you're trying to do material identification or like navigate to like a specific area, or like you're like, even the instructions of like what you're trying to accomplish for that day. Like I think that those things are going to be like a part of like the workflows that people are seeing. I think we're far off on like the tactile, like very like, to your point, like the hands piece is like the vision has gotten pretty good, which is interesting, but it's like relating that to a machine that can actually like do the action. But I think like just random, like I'm curious to see what happens with this physical labor component, because like you have all these companies that are coming out right now that are like, oh, you're trying to move like that, like pile of rocks from there to there, and like I can have a human do this, or I can have this robot that's a tenth of the cost. Yeah, they might be 50% slower, but they're still cheaper overall than like paying the salary of the human. So
Well, and they're
um,
figuring it out. I study. I'm just a nerd for technology, and
yeah,
so especially in the construction industry, because in my mind, it's a very outdated industry in the sense that there's a lot of opportunity to enhance it, not replace jobs, but enhance it. And so they already have a robot. You think about drywall. Drywall sucks. Okay, moving drywall is one of the things that sucks the most, and hanging drywall on a 20-foot ceiling really, really sucks because those things are pretty high. And it sounds like you've done some construction work yourself. They've got a robot that will move that drywall, and you don't have your safety concerns. You don't have your workers' compensation issues. And sure, he might be 50% slower, but it's going to get better and better and better and better. And so a lot of the monotonous, non-safe jobs, I have no doubt in my mind that they're going to figure out a way to use robotics with the combination of AI to figure out how to take the worst parts of some laborious industries such as construction away, and keep the pieces that really require dexterity. And that's the piece that I haven't seen. And have you seen the dexterity of our hands and everything? It just hasn't been replicated.
not yeah, not I haven't seen it like at the expectation that we have. I think there's machines right now, like we're starting to see these like programmable arms that are like they come out, it's basically this default thing, and then I can make it do whatever I want. And they can do these like more like minute tasks that are like they require that dexterity, but the flexibility of that like entity, or that robot is like, in what it can and can't do and what it can and can't learn, is just not there. That they're very specific. Like think it's a way to think about it is like almost how we have like a robot that's on a car assembly line. It's basically, imagine that, but it's like more programmable. But still, like once it's programmed for that thing, it only has like so much variance that. And that's, I think, for most people too, they're like, oh, I only want it to have so much variance. Like I don't want it to we're trying to do this repetitive task, right? And like that's really
Yeah,
its
and that.
its goal. So yeah, I don't know. I'm just imagining like an
Well,
electrician.
yeah,
Like there's no, in my mind, it's like, or even just like HVAC, like there's it's going to be really, really hard. And it's to a higher level of this point too is like, so the funniest part to me is like, looking at this whole AI thing, if we had this conversation 5 or 10 years ago, we'd be like, oh yeah, I'm, worried about blue collar, like they're like, they're, and in reality, like it's totally been the opposite. Like any creative or thought, because it's like anything that is mind related only, like rather than mind and physical, like that is like where you're going to
AI
see
can
the
change it
biggest
like that.
disruption happening, and you're
Yeah.
already seeing it. Yeah, exactly. Especially when it's something that it's like, okay, I can have a database of information that then the AI is going to and pulling and extracting information from. So the customer experience is a great example of this. Like we're seeing these companies, like these layoffs that are happening at these tech companies that you see the headlines for, and like all of these periodicals. Like it's not engineers they're laying off. Like this is like entire customer service departments that just entirely got automated away because an engineer wrote a piece of software that basically is functioning at a higher level than what the average entry level employee could do, right? And so then they just have, okay, we have instead of needing a 5,000 person team, like we now only need a 100-person team. And those 100 people, like all they're doing are like tail cases, right? Where it's like, oh, like this isn't in the average, like we don't have this in our corpus yet. So it's like we need a human to intervene. But as soon as that human intervenes, They document what they just solved. That gets added to the database. And so the next time that this happens, the AI suddenly has that as a source that it can go back to, because and so it just is this perpetual thing where your internal data suddenly becomes more and more valuable to your organization's operations.
It's crazy because as you just described, let's say you get on a tech call and they send you to level 2 and level 3 and level 4. Well, eventually the AI will learn everything that has been escalated to a level 4 problem that a human was required for, and they'll just replace that human.
100%. 100%. I mean, we're seeing this already. Like every early stage company that I'm seeing, like we're all doing this in some way. Like there's all some version of it. Where, and like for us, like we just like built this internal database, and like we like our team members, like they can just query against it with the question that they don't know. Like the customer's asking this, like give me information related to this so that I can answer this question. Gives them the information, and then it's like, okay, write me a response based off of this customer's thing, based off this information that you just pulled back. Writes response. That gets taken back. They make it maybe a little bit more human, but I can take an offshore person that's like got decent English levels, drop them into a product, and like within a week they're up to speed on like here's how we provide customer service to these customers. So
It's unreal how quickly and how exponentially fast things can change with what AI is doing. For people that are less technically inclined, they don't know coding, they're how should they feel about all this?
yeah, I think again it's just like if you can like close off to it right now and like try to fight it. I think it's an inevitability. Like all these companies are going to adopt versions of this at some time frame. Like if I was, again, working at a company, like I would try to just start interacting with it, and even just make it like 10% of your day, right? Where it's like, I'm just trying to use it for like 10% of my jobs. Like, even if you do that, like that's going to give you, fast forward 2 years, you're going to be miles ahead of every other person around you that's doing the same job. Because like, as you get deeper and deeper with this, you start to like understand like, oh, like it's good at these things and it's bad at these things within my, scope of work. So I'm just going to start like building these things. So I think that's one component. The other component that I'm trying to, communicate with everyone is like, think about this as like, how do I build workflows? Like, no, like, and the bigger idea here is like, chat is great as a sandbox. Like, if I'm trying to figure out what I'm trying to get the AI to do, it's great for that. But it is terrible. Like, I don't want to chat with an AI every time that I'm trying to get an outcome to happen. So like think about like, okay, how do I like chat with it? I figure out what I'm trying to get. And then how do I build that into a workflow so that I can just provide it raw materials, and every time it's just creating that same output that I'm trying to get from that. So like again with Swell, like this is exactly what we're doing, right? Where it's like, okay, cool, I build templates. So like say I'm trying to write LinkedIn posts, it's like give me 5 key takeaways from this episode, and it like gives the key takeaways, and then it's like, okay, write a 3-paragraph LinkedIn post based off of each of these key takeaways, write it in XYZ tone, style, and voice. Okay. And then it writes each of those LinkedIn posts. So then all I do is I like provide the AI that template, or sorry, provide AI that source material, which is that video.
Mm-hmm.
And then it just creates all of those content outputs based off of the templates that I've already pre-described. But it does that for LinkedIn. It does that for Twitter. It does that for, all your video social channels. It writes your blog posts, etc. And so that's how like we are seeing people most effectively use this. Is just like take the workflows you already have and then automate as much as you can with AI, with whatever tools that you have off the shelf that you can use. And that's going to be the most effective way to implement it, and not like just be overwhelmed by this thing as it starts to be adopted, internally within all of these companies.
Yeah, and even with the platform that I use that we're talking on, riverside.fm, you post a video, it'll pop out 15 different potential shorts that you can just upload to YouTube Short by analyzing the video that, after we're done, it'll analyze the video that we just talked about. It'll give me 15 different potential YouTube Shorts. Now, a lot of time, I have to or have one of my colleagues upload it. AI will be able to do all that. And it sounds like AI is doing all that for you under Swell AI, correct?
Yeah. So we haven't done the social media scheduling yet. That's like on our roadmap. We're probably a month and a half out away from this, but we see this, like that's where it's going. But I mean, there's these other companies, like a social media manager, like as a role, like won't exist in the next
Right.
18 months.
It
Like
will-
you're just going to have these tools where it's like, cool, here's all of our posts. Like here's our content library. Like go post things. or just like schedules them out, and there's a human that sits over the top of it that's maybe doing like final touches on it, right? But again, instead of needing a team of 10 people, I just need one really good person, and then they're just augmented by this, and that's how we see this heading. But I mean, again, as a company, like especially if you're early stage and you're small, like you're just going to lean on this thing entirely, right? Like I like previously I'd always say to people like, hey, pick one or two channels and like focus on those. And if you just focus on those, like for 2 years, like you'll get to $1 million ARR, right? Like so a million a year like revenue, and this is like for software companies. Now it's like, okay, yeah, you could do that, or like you could also just like use these AI tools to publish to all of these channels, and it might not be perfect, but it's like at least something that you weren't doing at all previously,
Yeah.
right? And with all this stuff, it'll get like more and more advanced. Like, and this is a great example of this. So like, and honestly, this is a higher, like a more 40,000 foot view on all of this technology, but like these LLMs are trained off of the general knowledge of the internet, right? Well, like the general knowledge, like the average knowledge is pretty terrible in all reality. So what, like when people are like, oh, I can't like get AI, like AI is bad, or it's like not the quality level. It's like, well, honestly, like a lot of the times what we see is like, if we just provide it like, hey, I want you, like, here's the tone, style, and voice I want you to write in. Act like you're a person from like this zip code in California. And like talk like them, or like this zip code in Alabama, talk like them. And then here's the source material that I want you to write based off of. Like we can make outputs where it's like, oh, this feels like a journalist that's been in been in this world for 20 plus years, right?
Isn't that
So
incredible?
it's crazy. But so like to take that even further, like on the clip side, right? So like, yeah, the clips are not perfect yet, but like what's going to happen is somebody's going to go and they're going to go scrape all of YouTube shorts and TikTok and Instagram reels, and they're going to be like, cool, only find viral posts. Now let's train like that's the source material that we are training this AI based off of. And now like rather than just the average of everything that's out there on YouTube shorts, it's just only the winners, right? And so then it's going to go and look for these clips that are just only the winners, basically. And that's going to create, like, we're already seeing this where it's like, it's creating better outputs than like what the average is. But the challenge with all of this is like to train one of these models now is super expensive. The cost is like decreasing dramatically, but like, just to get like a basic thing like I just described, it's like easily like $750,000 to like $1.2 million to train, like to pay, like literally to pay the power bill for these GPUs to train this model. Right?
Okay.
So,
yeah, I mean, to your point, and this is a standard that's standard the test of time, or saying that standard the test, garbage in, garbage out. And so, to your point, if you have good source material, these AIs, you said LLMs, language learning model, for audience, if you're not sure what that was, these language learning model artificial robots or AI will be able to produce much better outputs if you give it good inputs. But that was the funny thing about the different variations between ChatGPT. Like the second ChatGPT was out, I was on it, you were on it, and I'm like, okay, this is. But when they got to 3 or 3.5, and that was only within what, a matter of like 5 or 6 months, the difference,
Totally.
Cody, was
it's crazy.
That's when I first realized this is something we have never seen in the last 150 years, and it is
100%.
Scary. That's when I was not scared, because I'm never like you.
I think any new technology is scary though, right? Like so I studied economics in college, and like you look at like the industrial revolution, or like the internet, or like the smartphone, or like even the telephone, like all of those like base technology changes at every point in history. Like there is always like this, like, oh my God, what's happening? Our world is collapsing, right? This pushback. And then this next generation comes up with it, a part of their everyday life. And they're like, oh, this is just how we live our life, right? And so it's just like, I mean, the earth is a flat circle, or time is a flat circle, or whatever that saying is.
There's nothing new under the sun.
It just keep happening over and over again.
The thing is the speed at which it happens, though, because of the internet, is our minds can't even process it that quickly.
It's totally insane. Yeah. I think that, and just like, again, it's not even this isn't even a part of everybody's daily life yet, but like Apple will ship an AI in the next like probably couple of months, right?
100%.
It's just gonna one day, like every iPhone in the world is just gonna have like Siri, right?
Yep.
That's like, but Siri that's AI powered that actually works. And like you're gonna be able to chat with it and ask it questions and like all like that's just gonna be on every mobile device. And like if I'm Google, right? Like this is why people are freaking out about this as well, like on the like the search engine side.
Uh-huh.
Like if I'm Google and like one day people just have this thing that can find them any information that they want because it's trained on the entirety of like the internet, like your your business just evaporated overnight, right?
It's gone.
Especially now with like majority of the content that Google is serving is like not actually providing any value. Like what I actually want is like, I don't want a 1,500 word blog post for how to do a squat, right? Like I want give me the 3 bullet points
Mm-hmm.
or even so that's one piece. And this other thing that's we're seeing happen, and this is on the media side, which is super interesting, is that like Gen Z is now starting to use like TikTok and Instagram Reels as their search engine. So instead of going to Google to find like, nightclub or bar or food or, any of these, like, this is where like the searches that we're seeing being like taken over by this, or even like fashion related stuff. They're now starting that search on TikTok and
Are
they aren't
you
even going to
kidding
Google. They
me?
don't trust Google as much as they trust. And it kind of makes sense too, because it's like, oh, I have this wall of text that I have like, there's no social like proof behind that. Like, I don't know who this writer is or what they wrote about it. But if, Stephanie makes this TikTok that's like 5 bars in, Denver, Colorado that you need to check out. And like, this is a human, so there's social like pressure for her to provide good information because if she doesn't, then there's like repercussions to her trust, right? And then I can also like I watch that video, I click on her profile, I see that she has a XYZ amount of followers and so many videos. There's like a trust metric that's built in contrast to a website where that doesn't exist in the same
The
way. So
downfall with that,
like
Cody, is you have every idiot posting on TikTok that knows nothing about doing a squat. And so
100%, 100%.
like that leads to that blows me away to hear that they are now just going to TikTok as their search engine and looking for a video. I mean, you've seen it. This social media has given every Tom, Dick, and Henry, Jane a voice, and they learn 5 minutes of information about a topic and they think they're experts and they don't have a freaking clue.
No, for sure. I think that's like a huge, downfall of this. I think they're trying to combat it of like, oh, this person talks about this topic regularly. Like, so a great example of this is I think her name's like Excel Girl or something like that. But she basically is just like, here's like Excel formulas, right? Sounds so ridiculous. It's one of the best selling courses that exists on the internet right now.
I believe
If
it.
you just Google like Excel Girl or something, it'll come up. But so for her, like like, why is there trust built in? Where it's like, okay, on a daily basis, she's doing these like, tips about Excel. If that entire profile is talking about this thing and like over and over again, that content is being consumed by these same people, there's like strong signal typically in that this is actually providing value.
The trust
So like
meter is
that's why
going
it's
up.
like, yeah. So it's like, say you talked about like donuts and then like cars one day, right? Like, and you just bounce all over. There's a way stronger likelihood that video actually won't get reach. And again, this is just based off of the data that we're seeing in contrast to videos that are constantly talking about the same things basically over and over and over again, that are in the same niche, whatever that ends up being. So this could be like, within podcasting, this could be within, content writing, this could be in, again, like Excel, it could be anything, baking, whatever you could point at. But we're seeing accounts that are, very cohesive in the brand, like the type of content are going to like, they're outperforming way better because that's the only metric they can lean on, right? Is like, I don't have like Google is built off of like our backlinks going, like are other people linking to the website. That's our trust metric. Now it's like, okay, is this person on a daily basis talking about this topic and people like it and consume it? The same people over and over again like it and consume it. Answers, yes, sweet. Let's show them the more people because they're probably an expert within that topic. But I totally agree. The barriers to entry and like the amount of noise that you're going to get like through it like in this system is just like so much larger and greater than it was previously.
Well, and that's a very scary concept. If our trust metric is being built upon whether people like it or not, I mean, populism can lead to a very scary path,
Totally.
and that's essentially what
Totally.
you've
And a
described.
lot of these tools, like, I mean, it's just turned to rage bait, right? Like
Yeah.
Twitter has basically evolved into this where it's like people just say the things that they know the audience will be so, like, they're most upset about because it gets the greatest amount of impressions. And then they, like go shill some course. So,
So, Cody, I want to conclude with this. If you're someone who, again, is not in this area, you don't know code, you don't know technology, you know how to turn a computer on, you know some basics about computer, but you're very entrepreneurially motivated and you recognize the power of AI, but you don't know where the opportunities lie next or how to get involved, what advice would you give them?
yeah. So, I mean, we're seeing companies do this on top of us. So I'll just give these examples, but it's like you can, find something that people were already doing, charge a third of the cost of what it was previously, and then build from the ground up, like with these AI tools. So an example of this is like unlimited podcast clips for, podcasters, right? So it's like you go and you DM, or you Twitter DM, you LinkedIn DM like podcast hosts, and you say, hey, 500 a month, and we'll make unlimited clips for you, about your episodes. For every channel that you're trying to get, basically to do promotion on. You can do this to companies, businesses as well. And then you send out 1,000 DMs that'll probably turn into, we'll just say like 5 customers or whatever. And like at that, right there, you've got a $2,500 a month company. Scale that up, start charging like sell these add-on features, etc. And suddenly, like you've got this business that you're like getting off the ground. And there's these tools that already exist. Like Swell does clips. There's like other ones called Opus. Like Riverside does these as well. You could use all of these different variations to create these. So I think that's one play. Like another one would be like, okay, we're gonna do like survey analysis for you or whatever, right? Like, so say like your company does like a ton of surveys and you're trying to collect this data. So you take all that data and you put it into like a huge context window, and you say, extract all the insights from this from this document. Now rank stack these insights based off of importance of like how often they're mentioned, within the customer feedback that we're getting. Another like simple way that this could be used. There's tools out there that like allow you to connect all these things together. So like Zapier is like we're seeing be like one of these. Make.com is another one where it's like I can create kind of this like, imagine like a flow chart of events. So like, for example, I get an email within, Gmail. It like analyzes that content, like what's being said, and it writes a draft for me, and then it saves it as a draft for me, like in that, in that, like, but how people are doing this is for like PR in particular, where they get like inbound, and then they're like writing these PR responses based off of that inbound. So I think it's just like finding something you're doing in your life right now. And like a lot of the times, like what I always say is like, what's the thing you hate most doing about your current workflow? And they're like, cool, I hate that thing. And like 9 times out of 10, that thing can be entirely automated with some type of like chain of AI like solutions, or like chain of, these simple software like stacked together, and then implement that within, your workflow. And then once that's implemented, then, okay, what's the next thing that I hate doing within my workflow? I hate this. Okay, how do I add that piece? And like what I was just talking about with like my friend who's at like head of, automation engineering, that's his whole job, right? But instead of like incrementally doing this, he goes in and he's like, okay, I'm gonna do that whole system. Cool. It's like it's entirely designed. But I think just like these very small bite-sized pieces, that's going to be the most effective way for you to implement this within your, whatever your career is. And then basically like you can start to ratchet that up, and it gets more complex just as you get more comfortable and have more understanding. But
Yeah.
if I was, starting over with all of this and trying to get educated on it, that's what I would do personally. So
Excellent advice. And I like how inch by inch, life is a cinch, yard by yard, life is hard. Just take that one thing that you hate, figure out how can you utilize AI to your advantage in your workflow, get rid of it, and then build on top of that.
100%.
Cody, this has been a very enlightening, very fun, and fascinating conversation. Thank you so much for your time today. And it'll be interesting to see where AI takes all of us as a society in the coming months and years.
I appreciate it. Thanks for having me, Andrew. It was awesome to be on. And yeah, if there's any follow-up questions people have, you can find me on Twitter or LinkedIn. And then swellai.com is the company that we're building. So excited to talk to anybody.
Everybody check it out, swellai.com, and you'll see what Cody's building. Thanks so much, Cody. Have a great day.
Thank you. You too.
Thank you for listening to the Andrew Holland Podcast. Never miss an episode by subscribing to and liking our YouTube channel, the Andrew Holland Podcast, and by following and liking the show on your favorite audio platforms. Be sure to connect with us on X, formerly Twitter, A Holland Podcast. That's A Holland Podcast. So you can interact with Andrew, the team, and our guests throughout the week. Thank you again so much for listening. Have a great day, and we'll talk again soon.